All right, everyone. I'd like to call to order the February 10th, 2022 meeting of the Fairfax County Architectural Review Board. Excuse me. To conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both emergency procedures authorized by the Freedom of Information Act, the ARB needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask in your advance for your patience. First, because each member of this ARB is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each ARB member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear your other colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. And just to start things off, I'm Christopher Daniel, Chairman of Architectural Review Board, and I am at home in my house in Reston. And after that, Ms. Aubrey.
Yes, this is Michelle Aubry, and I am in my residence in Alexandria, Virginia, and I can hear everyone fine so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Mr. Burns.
This is John Burns. I am in my living room in Holland Hills, and I can hear everyone who's spoken so far just fine.
All right, Ms. Wan.
Yes, this is Samantha Huang. I am at my home at Reston. I can hear everyone speaking so far clear.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Kalinsky.
Yes, this is Stephen Kalinsky. I'm in my office in Alexandria, and I can hear everybody so far. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Murray.
This is Elise Murray. I'm in my den in my residence in Vienna.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Orr.
Hi, I'm Kay Orr, and I am at my mother-in-law's in Venice, Florida.
Thank you, Kay. Mr. Zellman.
This is Jason Zellman. I'm in my office in the city of Fairfax, and I can hear everyone just fine.
All right. We did not hear from Ms. Knockins, so she is marked as absent and unexcused. We did hear that Mr. Plumpy would be attending, but he is not here at this moment. So the current time, oh, I think I just saw him show up. So Joe Plumpy, if you're here, if you could introduce yourself and say where you're calling in from.
Sure. My name is Joseph Plumpy, coming in from my residence in Fairfax Station, Virginia. And I can hear everybody nice and very well and see those people who have their videos on.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. All right. At this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to the Vice Chairman, Mr. Zellman, so that I may be heard to make the requisite motion. All right. I move that each ARB member's voice is adequately heard by each other member of this ARB.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
I think Ms. Orr beat Mr. Burns on that one, so I'll give it to Ms. Orr. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion carries.
All right. As determined by the roll call, 9 members of this ARB are present and therefore satisfy the ARB quorum minimum. ARB bylaws state that a minimum of 6 members are required to determine a quorum. It is so moved.
Is there a second?
I'll try again.
Mr. Burns with the second. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion carries.
Third, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures. The fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to this meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this ARB to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting. And that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the ARB and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the ARB may conduct this meeting electronically through WebEx, a county virtual meeting platform, and available for access through the ARB County website or through phone at 1-844-621-3956 with the access code 2345-258-0984. It is so moved.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
I think Mr. Plumpy got in there. Sorry, Mr. Kalinsky. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion carries.
Next, it is required for all of the matters addressed on today's agenda are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and discharge this board's lawful purposes and duties and responsibilities. It is so moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Kalinsky. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion carries.
All right. We are going to save the agenda item for the public for later until we get into the agenda and approve the agenda. So I will move on. If you can pass my gavel back there, Mr. Zellman. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Denise, is there any information you'd like to share with all participants and attendees regarding WebEx and the virtual meeting?
Yes. Thank you. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online within 10 days. Attendees may email me during the meeting, use the Q&A box or chat function in the WebEx platform for inquiries. Staff will monitor and respond accordingly. Attendees experiencing technical issues, please call WebEx technical assistance at 1-866-799-3293. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. All right, so after we get through all the special motions to begin any ARB meeting, we like to begin it by reading the statement and purpose of intent for historic overlay districts. Seeing as I had not asked anybody and I'm feeling in the mood, I decide I'll give the reading of the statement of purpose of intent of historic overlay districts. Historic overlay districts are created for the purpose of promoting the general welfare, education, economic prosperity, and recreational pleasure of the public through the perpetuation of those general areas or individual structures and premises that have been officially designated by the Board of Supervisors as having historical, cultural, architectural, or archaeological significance. Regulations within such districts are intended to protect against destruction of or encroachment upon such areas, structures, and premises, to encourage uses which will lead to their continuance, conservation, and improvement in a manner appropriate with the preservation of cultural, social, economic, political, architectural, or archaeological heritage of the county, to prevent creation of environmental influences adverse to such purposes, and to assure that new structures and uses within such districts will be in keeping with the character to be preserved and enhanced. All right. Moving onward with our agenda, a few reminders for our applicants who are presenting. We only have two, so it's pretty straightforward. But applicants, please attempt to limit your project presentations to roughly about 8 minutes for a first submission. And if it's a resubmission, 3 minutes. Please try to keep it tight 3 minutes if you can. With that, we move to the approval of the agenda. I would seek a motion to approve the agenda that was provided.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move to approve the agenda.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Mr. Burns. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. The agenda is approved. All right, Denise, do we have any introductions or recognitions of guests?
No, not that I see, Chris.
All right. I know we have a lot of staff in line, but I didn't expect us to have any guests at the moment. All right. Next item on the agenda before we move into our items for action is public comments. So the ARB needs to determine how long each member of the public will be able to speak during public comment periods. The public will be allowed to comment after consent agenda items and after each action item, as is standard ARB practice. So I would entertain a motion or discussion, obviously, on potential time being provided for public comment. And I'll note that in our draft motions, there is a motion that can be provided to indicate how long we would afford, as a preference. Previously, we've accommodated 3 minutes. But given we do have an item that might garner some significant public comment, I would obviously entertain other suggestions.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion.
Mr. Zellman.
I'll move that each member of the public will have 3 minutes to speak about any consent or action item on this evening's agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Kay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. All right, that takes us further on to our agenda. We have no items on the agenda for consent calendar. So we will move right on to our items for action. We have 2 items for action. The first of which is ARB 22 RBM 01 screen porch and deck installation located at 12125 Pope's Head Road, Fairfax, tax map 0673010028 in the Roby Mill Historic Overlay District. The applicant is proposing to construct a new screen porch and open deck with 3 steps and composite decking. This is represented by Mr. Pablo Grivala from Quality Renovations, Inc. Sir, yes, I see you there up on our camera. Hopefully we can.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi to everybody. Okay, well, let me try to share my screen, so see what can we do here. I hope this works. Sure.
Yep, we are seeing a presentation that you have pulled up on your screen. It's minimized, it's made small right now, so we're not going to be able to see it very well, but we can see your screen.
What about now?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Pablo Grijalva. I'm the presenter for 12125 Pope's Head Road. So we're trying to we want to build a new screen porch. Well, there is an existing screen porch. Let me go back all the way to there is existing screen porch and a deck already there. We want to rebuild it and make it a new screen porch, the same footprint. Screen porch is going to be a little bit bigger than it is now, just to come to the end of the house. We want to use PVC wrap on the exterior and also white railings and with black balusters. So I got some examples of how the screen porch gonna look at the end. This is the type of railing that we normally use. It's a Trex Select Classic White with black balusters, and the color of the decking is gonna be the same as you are looking at your screen right now. It's a pebble gray decking, and this is how our screen porches come out at the end. My customer wants to go pretty much with all white as much as possible, and this is the decking color that we're gonna use, and this is some examples of Trex railings that we open to any other suggestion. If we don't, we can use white, but my customer definitely want to go with white. That is possible on this case. I'm sorry, guys, it's gonna come out there again. So this is the what we are proposing now, with 2 skylights and a screen porch and the deck, walking out to the driveway. And this is what we are proposing now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Definitely kept it within the time constraints. Thank you, I really appreciate that. Before we get to any questions from members of the ARB, we do obviously first inquire if there are any comments from members of the public on the applicant, either in favor or opposed to the application. If someone wants to indicate that, they may through the raising their hand or through the Q&A section. I'll give a moment for folks if they want to do that. And Denise, if you could just check to see if there is any public comments on this item.
No one has raised their hand. There are 2 callers, and callers, if you'd like to make a comment, please press *3, and that will let us know that you're raising your hand to make a comment.
Again, this would be making a comment on this application we are currently reviewing.
Yes, thank you. I see no comments.
All right. Well, seeing as there are no public comments, what I'm going to do next is I'll go around to the various ARB members and see if they have any questions, starting with the wonderful Michelle Aubry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at the material initially, my question was, is this a replacement for something that's already there? And the presenter has made clear that yes, it is a replacement for what is there, and with maybe a little bit larger footprint. But from an archaeological standpoint, I have no questions or concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Burns.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one question. I'm perfectly comfortable with extending the length of the screened area of the porch to the end of the house, but it's unclear from the drawings that we've seen if it actually comes directly into the corner board of the siding, or is it slightly set back from the corner board of the siding? Where exactly does it hit at the corner of the house?
We want to try to bring it flush with the corner of the siding, just so we can have a line out with the house siding.
Okay, and how will you detail that? I mean, we have a second piece that will attach to the corner board, or what?
Yeah, we're pretty much gonna cut part of the corner board and add a PVC to attach it to that corner of the house.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Other than that, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Burns. Moving onward, Ms. Swan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have no comments.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Kolinsky.
Thank you. Normally, I would suggest that we, rather than using the stark white, that the owner would use some sort of earth tones, except this is not visible or barely visible from the street, you know, even in the winter time. You say there's enough of an earth berm going up the driveway from all the pictures and the satellite images I've seen. So I'm not going to push for any changes, but my preference would be to see some sort of earth tone, just the way it's a brown tone now. Maybe perhaps even match what the front portico or the front porch on the house has, which is a beige-ish sort of color. But not critical in my opinion, but if it were more visible, I would make the case. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kolinsky. Ms. Murray.
I agree that it's barely visible, if at all, from the road, and therefore I have no objections to this.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Ms. Orr.
No comments.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Orr. Mr. Plumpy.
Out of curiosity, is the shingle to match the existing shingles of the home?
Yes.
Okay. And since you gave such a short presentation, I have no comment at all. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Plumpy. Mr. Zellman.
I'm good. No comments. Thank you.
All right. I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Kolinsky, that obviously I would always prefer a more earthy toned color. But given where this property is located and obviously the amount of shielding it already has, I'm not particularly concerned about that being visible from a historic property. So I think you've also addressed any of the kind of architectural detail questions that might have come up that Mr. Burns brought up. So I don't have any further questions as well. So with that in mind, I would entertain a motion if there is one from any of our members. And I'll remind you all, I can't make them. Our bylaws don't let me make motions.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burns.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the ARB approve action item ARB-22-RBM-01, located at 12125 Pope's Head Road, Fairfax, tax map number 067301, lot 0028 in the Roby's Mill Historic Overlay District, for the proposed construction of a new screened porch and open deck as submitted and presented at the February 10, 2022 ARB meeting. Upon review of the materials, the proposal is found to meet the requirements of zoning ordinance 3101, historic overlay districts.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
I believe that was seconded by Miss Orr first. I thought that's who I heard. So we have a second. There is a motion on the floor. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries, passes. All right, sir, Denise, the ARB administrator, will be with you in the coming days to talk about any approvals that may be made for this project, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Onward and upward. Next, we're moving on to our last item for action. This is ARB 22 MTV 01, Holland Hills Historic Overlay District Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Plan Amendment 2018 IV MV4 and Rezoning 2021 MV 00017 for a potential Holland Hills Historic Overlay District, consisting of 492 parcels located within tax map grids 93-1, 93-3, 93-4, and 102-1. The proposal is to create a new historic overlay district for the Holland Hills Historic District. Staff will be presenting the analysis of the potential creation of the new historic overlay district, including map, listing of contributing and non-contributing properties, the draft zoning ordinance, comprehensive plan amendment. In addition, I believe Ms. Arsenault is also going to present at least a cursory presentation on potential design guidelines as well, since that is an item we will be carrying for workshop. And so since her presentation is relatively short, she's going to focus on everything. So after we have a vote on an action item, we can discuss it in workshop for the potential guidelines, just for clarification there. Is that correct, Laura?
Yes, that's correct. Mr. Daniel, I just will say my presentation will be longer than 8 minutes. I apologize in advance.
That is quite all right. A prior applicant bought you more time.
Yes, I'm on borrowed time. I understand. Thank you very much. Thank you to the ARB members for having me here tonight. It's good to be back. I don't know if I ever left, but I'm back in a different form. My name is Laura Arsenault. I'm the branch chief of the Heritage Resources and Plan Development group in the Department of Planning and Development. And tonight I'm here to present on the potential Holland Hills Historic Overlay District, which includes a rezoning application, a plan amendment, and a zoning ordinance amendment. So I'm calling it the zoning trifecta. So here we go. Okay. So give a little bit of background. The Holland Hills neighborhood is located in Alexandria, Virginia, on the eastern part of the county. At the Board of Supervisors motion, we started this in July 31st, 2018, where they authorized staff to begin a feasibility study about the establishment of the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. That included looking at a zoning ordinance amendment, a comprehensive plan amendment, a rezoning to add the historic overlay district to the map, and drafting design guidelines, and also a staff report that I'll go into in just a minute. Since that authorization, we've gone out, done a lot of survey work, analysis with the work group and discussions. There was a community poll in September of 2021 where we polled the community on their support or opposition to a potential historic overlay district, and we had 62% of the responses in favor. Staff presented the items 1 to 3 above as a workshop item for to the ARB on January 13th, 2022. And since then, on January 25th, the board authorized the items above and advertised the public hearings for the board and planning commission. So staff analysis and findings. Based on section 3103 of the zoning ordinance, 3101.3 of the zoning ordinance, establishment of historic overlay districts, staff created a staff report with the things outlined on the screen, including analysis of current conditions, description of individual structures and premises of interest, specific features to be preserved, recommending contributing and non-contributing properties, recommending potential boundaries, and identifying potential adverse effects. And once again, back to the zoning ordinance amendment, the comprehensive plan amendment, and the rezoning, and then also the design guidelines. So we had a lot of work to do. The current conditions in the analysis, the ownership, there's currently 492 parcels within the potential Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. 468 are privately owned, 14 are owned by the Civic Association, 8 are owned by the Park Authority, and 2 are owned by the Board of Supervisors. The existing land use is primary residential with a couple parks in there. And the existing zoning is primarily R2 with some lots zoned R1, R3, and R4. So description of individual structures and premises of interest. The zoning ordinance requires staff to determine at least one of 8 specified criteria in order for the board to determine that the potential historic overlay district possesses historic, architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance. Therefore, staff felt that the criteria at 3101.3.a, parenthesis 3, which notes embodying the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, representing the work of a master, possessing high artistic values, or represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Staff felt that was most appropriate for the historic overlay district. Staff recommends the Holland Hills meets this criteria by exemplifying contemporary style architecture that possesses high artistic values and by representing a distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction due to the unique planned visual and physical relationship between the residential structures. So specific features to be preserved. The period of significance that staff looked at was from 1946 to 1971, which matches the existing National Register nomination analysis. Staff also recommended contributing features as follows: the sculptural brick chimneys and masonry end walls, large wall expanses of windows, roof styles including shallow pitched gable roofs, flat shed roofs, or V-shaped butterfly roofs, the preservation of natural landscape topography by selecting minimally invasive building siting, and architectural features that are characteristic of the contemporary style. Here's a map of the identified contributing and non-contributing properties as recommended by staff. As mentioned previously, there's 492 properties in the potential historic overlay district. Staff recommends that 454 properties would be contributing to the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District and 38 would be non-contributing properties. The staff recommended boundaries are shown on the map on the screen. Staff recommended including all parcels within the National Register Historic District. That's outlined in red on the screen. Staff recommended adding 10 parcels, 8 lots owned by the Park Authority and 2 lots owned by the board. Staff analyzed but did not recommend including 2 lots owned by the Holland Meadows Swim and Tennis Club, and 1 lot owned by the Fairfax County Public Schools. There's some potential adverse effects that staff identified, including partial and complete demolitions, new construction, addition to residential dwellings, swimming pools, and fences. So onto the draft design guidelines. The draft design guidelines were included in the staff report that was published last week for consideration. The ARB will have final approval authority over the design guidelines if the board adopts the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. And I have a short presentation from Sarah Vonish and Laura Hughes from EHT Traceries, the consultant group we worked with, and they will do a presentation on the draft design guidelines. So Sarah, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. You guys can hear me okay? Okay, great. Perfect. I saw nodding heads, so I figured. I'm Sarah Vonish. I'm a historic preservation specialist and project manager with EHT Traceries. Good to be back with you again tonight. As you know, we've been working on updates to all the HOD design guidelines, and in coordination with that effort, we've also been preparing the design guidelines for Holland Hills. And Laura, you can go to the next slide. This slide outlines our process and methodology, and it's been consistent with other guidelines that you've seen, most recently with the Wellington at River Farm guidelines. We started with on-site survey and research of the existing district, followed by development of the draft. And as part of that process, we consulted with DPD staff as well as the Holland Hills Workgroup and the greater Holland Hills community. The guidelines have been revised a couple of times based on feedback that we've received from the county as well as community members. And so now we're here tonight to review the current draft. We'll be back with you in the next coming months, to finalize the guidelines for your adoption with your feedback incorporated. Next slide, Laura. So here you can see the document's contents and get a sense of the overall look and feel, very consistent with the other documents that you've seen from us. They begin with an overall introduction to historic overlay districts and the project review requirements and process. This is followed by an overview of the history and significance of this district in particular. In Chapter 3, we review the HOD boundary and resource inventory that Laura kind of just reviewed. And we also have a section on the district character, including identification of character defining features. And this section also includes an overview of the different housing models that you see throughout the neighborhood and the characteristics that are found in those housing types or those housing models and designs that should be preserved as part of any future project. So then Chapter 4, the design guidelines, it's divided into 3 parts. The first part pertaining to the preservation and rehabilitation of existing buildings, followed by guidelines for new construction and additions, and then finally guidelines for landscape, streetscape, and archaeological resources. And I'll review these in the next couple of slides. But finally, in the appendix, there's the glossary of terms, some additional resources that might be useful for users of the document, the full list of contributing and non-contributing properties, as well as a preventative maintenance checklist for users and residents. Next slide. So the first part of the design guidelines, the preservation and rehabilitation of existing buildings, provides guidance for treatments and strategies for retaining and preserving existing features and materials in a manner that's consistent with your review standards and the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. The guidelines do take into consideration the character of the mass-produced construction techniques and materials that were used in this neighborhood and other mid-century neighborhoods like it, that were selected for their affordability, recognizing that in some cases alterations and material replacement are necessary to retain the character and ensure the continued preservation of the community and the modernist resources. The section provides guidance in the form of recommended and not recommended treatments. It covers exterior building elements and features listed here, and also provides guidance on adaptation for health, safety, and accessibility, as well as sustainability. Next slide. The new construction and new addition guidelines provides guidance with the aim of helping homeowners and project applicants design compatible new buildings or additions that take cues from the neighborhood's mid-century modern architecture in a way that complements the historic character of the district. It addresses site design and building placement, recommending, among other things, that new additions maintain the spatial relationships found within the HOD. It addresses size, scale, and massing to ensure that new additions are designed to be subordinate and differentiated from the existing resources consistent with the standards for rehabilitation. It addresses proportion and symmetry, and in the case of Holland Hills, asymmetry. And it also provides recommendations for the building elements and features that are discussed in the first section, so that material selection and design is consistent with the character of the neighborhood. Next slide. Finally, the landscape and streetscape guidelines, because the relationship of the landscape and the relationship between buildings and their surroundings strongly contribute, in the case of Holland Hills, to the character of the district. These guidelines provide recommendations on how to appropriately approach landscape interventions, as well as archaeological resources if they are encountered within the HOD. Topics addressed in this section include site design, namely recommending the preservation of the existing network of vistas and view sheds and the natural landscape within the district. Privacy, fencing, and screening. This was an important element that we discussed in great detail with the work group and the community, and the guidelines recommend against visually impenetrable border fences that disrupt the important landscape and view sheds within the district. And it also provides guidance related to driveways and parking pads and how to incorporate these within the landscape, as well as landscape design. So that's all I had for my presentation. And Laura, are you picking it up or are we opening it up? Okay, all right, there you go.
Yeah, I've got a couple more slides. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah,
Yep.
for that overview of the design guidelines. I think they were, I thought, a 300-page staff report, and I think 125 were the design guidelines. So it's a very thorough document with great pictures and outlines. So thank you, Sarah. Okay. So I'm just going to touch real quickly on the kind of more administrative part of the potential historic overlay district, which is the zoning ordinance amendment, which will take us to the public hearings, which I'll discuss shortly. So the zoning ordinance amendment piece of this is creating a new historic overlay district in the zoning ordinance and providing language to support that. Most proposed regulations defer to the underlying zoning districts, which in this case is mostly R2, which is residential 2 dwelling units per acre. And we've added the purpose of the district and additional standards that we thought would protect the integrity of the district. The biggest change that's being proposed, being proposed to the underlying zoning districts, in addition to the underlying zoning district regulations, would be limiting the height of all structures, not just residential, to 35 feet. So that would be the maximum of any structures. Usually in neighborhoods, you can allow churches and other community amenities. And so we're limiting the height of all those potential structures to 35 feet. The comprehensive plan amendment and the rezoning. So the comprehensive plan amendment, the comprehensive plan is a document of recommendations. There's no changes to the planned land uses or density of the neighborhood. We are updating the inventory of historic sites listing to denote the historic overlay district designation and adding a boundary of the historic overlay district to the comprehensive plan map. The rezoning in a similar fashion is to add the potential Holland Hills historic overlay boundary to the zoning map. So it's a rezoning to just make that change. So wanted to give a little timeline and schedule of what's coming up. January 25th, the board authorization and hearing, as I mentioned earlier. February 2nd, I presented to the History Commission. February 3rd, we published the staff report. Today is February 10th. We're presenting to the ARB for potential action on the Historic Overlay District. February 23rd is the advertised Planning Commission public hearing at 7:30 p.m. There'll be an opportunity for public comment at that hearing as well. And on March 8th, we have the advertised Board of Supervisors public hearing that's scheduled for 4 p.m. and that is also open for public comment. And then hopefully we're aiming for March 10th for action on the design guidelines, but it will either be March or April, we're anticipating, if the board adopts the historic overlay district. So with that, I know that was twice as long as 8 minutes, but anyway, that's conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate it. I feel like since this is a topic that does garner public interest, and we will likely have some public comments, I'm going to go through just a few housekeeping items to kind of help folks understand how you might actually indicate a public comment. And so a few items, we have a few different staff members on hand that are going to help run the public comment session that's coming up next on this action item. So one of the individuals, Grace Davenport, will be queuing folks up to speak. So to indicate that you want to speak, you need to use the raise your hand feature if you wish to speak. Please remember to lower your hand once you've finished speaking, or as Denise pointed out earlier in our prior application, if you're on a phone, you can dial *3 on your dial pad, which will alert Grace that you'd also like to speak, because I know I think we have at least 2 folks that have called into the meeting, and we want you to be able to indicate if you want to provide your comment as well. In addition to Grace providing that assistance, we also have David Stinson. He is going to be assisting with timekeeping. So as you saw, the ARB voted, and we provided 3 minutes for any member of the public to speak for or against any application or action item we have up for vote. And we were, to make this easy, normally in a time before when we could all meet together in person, you know, it'd be much easier if us all in the same room. We'd have a timer or a light or some easy way to signal to you as you came up to the podium and spoke. Sadly, we are in a digital environment now, so it's requiring all kinds of new alternative means. So as it stands right now, we're going to have a timer that shows up on the screen counting down. Denise Dressel, who is the ARB administrator, is also going to be assisting. She is going to elevate you if you are an attendee and going to like to have a comment to a chance to speak. When it's your turn, you'll be given access to your camera and your mic at that time, so we'll let you unmute yourself, and we'll begin your timer once you've actually introduced yourself and started talking. So once we get the technology situated there, and once your time's up and you've given your comment, we'll elevate you back down to attendee, and you won't have access to your mic and camera anymore. In addition to that, obviously you don't have to speak your comment. We also have the Q&A box for public record. And Grace is also going to be reading any comments that are provided there. So if you don't wish to actually speak your public comment, you just like to have it typed up and read aloud, please feel free to type it into the Q&A. This is not being done like a Q&A session that you may have seen in other meetings where there's an answer and response. We're not answering questions. This is just a way to facilitate if folks like to provide a comment and don't have a desire to actually speak out loud. I think those are all the key points. Obviously, Laura, Denise, if there's anything else I missed, let me know. Or did I hit everything? Sounds like I got everything. I'm seeing thumbs up. I would ask that you do introduce yourself when you talk for the record. That would be very appreciated, so we can have that all recorded down. And I will turn it over to Denise and Grace and David, because I cannot see all that information that you might be able to see.
So if anybody would like to make a public comment, please just use the raise your hand function, which should be to the far right of your screen. If you click on the participants button.
I see at least one, Denise, on my screen. I believe Barbara Ward has her hand up. All right, Barbara, we've got you brought up there to presenter mode, so you should be able to unmute and speak. And once you've introduced yourself, even though I've already kind of introduced you, David will start that clock.
Hello, my name is Barbara Ward, and I was the co-chair of the Holland Hills Working Group that worked with Laura and the consultants. There were 9 people on the working group. We represented a variety of views about the HOD. Some people were in favor, some people were not. We worked for 2 years. We had more than a dozen meetings with the county employees, and there was a thorough airing of all of the issues. In the end, 6 members of the committee agreed that the HOD was something that should be pursued, and we wrote an extensive letter to Supervisor Stark as well as to the building department, enumerating our reasons why. We believe that this will help Holland Hills to maintain its mid-century character, and also to provide a method for enforcing our design review. We look forward to working with the ARB, and I won't take up any more time, but there is substantial community support. Let me just say that this all began in 2017, and we started with a petition to the supervisor that was signed by more than 70% of the community that asked at least for there to be an exploration. After that, there were a number of community meetings. Before the pandemic, they were in person. After the pandemic, they were online, much like this meeting here tonight. We have presented fully to the community what is entailed and what will be expected of them. So I think you have 62%, you had 82% of the community that participated in the poll. That shows you that there's been a lot of community involvement, and 62% of the people who voted for the HOD. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ward. Denise, I believe I at least see one other individual, Brusco, I believe. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. Please feel free to introduce yourself.
Yes, that's correct. So my wife and I became residents of Holland Hills in 2020, so we didn't really have a chance to be part of all the other proceedings that Barbara was mentioning. But I guess I just have some confusion with the actual guidelines, because I spoke to Laura through email, and everything she told me was great, because my main question was if the guidelines are going to follow the National Historic Guidelines, which are very clear that any kind of additions should actually be different from the original architecture. However, it seems like the actual guidelines that are written kind of state that that it should be the same. And when I was in the design review meeting yesterday, I was told that basically the addition that they don't follow the National Historic Guidelines. Maybe I'm confused about that part, but that any addition should have like the exact same siding and exact same materials. And that just seems to go against, I worked in the architecture field for most of my life and talked to a lot of architects. I used to work for Ross Can in Newport, Rhode Island, who's on the board of the historic preservation there. And everything I've always known is that it should actually be different. So I guess I'd just like some clarification on that in order to be able to be for the HOD in support of it as a resident here. And that was my main question or statement, I guess.
All right, well, thank you very much. Obviously, we're not doing a question and answer, but that is definitely a valuable comment for the membership to keep in mind when we begin our deliberation on the motion. So thank you.
And again, I just didn't get a chance to be part of that in the past, so I was hoping to ask that question here. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and I will, so I guess, Denise, if you and Grace are checking to see if we have any other comments, I'll just caveat that while this is just a chance for public comment on that, I would encourage any concerns like that regarding any HOD to reach out to the DPD staff to help clarify any questions about being in a historic overlay district. And I know that the staff there with Denise and others can work to address any of those questions that folks might have. But Denise, Grace, do we see any other folks that might have public comment?
Grace, you're muted.
Grace said she's having trouble with her audio.
Oh, okay. So I do not see anybody else's hand raised, but I am having difficulty seeing the black on black back in the
I'm
background.
checking right now, Denise, and the only people I've seen so far were our previous commenter and Ms. Ward. this
Yes.
point. I cannot tell if, obviously, again, if you are on, we have at least one call-in user. You have to do *3 if you wish to leave a comment. Just keep that in mind. Otherwise, if don't have any other public comments, I would then question if we've gotten anything in the Q&A, any public statements that might be needing to be read aloud. And we may have a problem with that if Grace is unable to use her audio at the moment.
So I can check the Q&A and I do. Oh, can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
we can
go
hear
ahead.
you, Grace.
All it took was a disconnect, connect. But we do not have anything in the question and answer box or the chat box.
Okay, no under raised hands. Seeing that, it seems like we have no other public comments. So with that, I'm going to close the public comment period and move on to the next portion of our considerations. Statements or arguments submitted by an official commission or department of the County of Fairfax or any state agency or local preservation organization has been presented and directed to the chair. As you all may have very well seen, or just showed up just recently in our inboxes, was that the History Commission sent a letter of support in favor of Holland Hills. It was given to us at about 6:15 this evening, directed to me as well, directed to to Chairman Mckay, as well as copying the Board of Supervisors, indicating that the History Commission fully supports the designation of the Holland Hills Historic Overlay District. And I believe they shared that with all the ARB members. Again, this is one that showed up this evening. But that is the only letter of record that I know of at this current moment, Denise, in an indication of support, unless there's another one that you want to let me know of.
I have not received anything, Mr. Daniel.
All right. Well, that takes us through those. Well, then we get to discussion. And as per tradition, we start with everyone's favorite board member, Ms. Michelle Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I'd like to start by just thanking Laura Arsenault and all of the staff of the department who have worked on this proposal for many years. I am actually still disappointed that we don't know what about 30% of the people that live in the community think about it. And I think that the fact that we had only 2 commenters tonight might be indicative of the fact that maybe either, even though everybody in the community is in theory been given information about it, maybe they don't all, maybe some people didn't pay as much attention to it as they should have and responded. I don't know. But I am concerned that there is a large portion, and I consider around 30% to be large, that we don't know what they think about the proposal. And on its face, I personally don't have a problem with having the historic overlay district. But I do also want to note right now, since we in our agenda had separated the zoning issue from the guidelines, but the presentation kind of smushed it all together, I do have a question about the historic overlay district guidelines that have been put together and whether they or not they are consistent with, or do they differ from, the community's existing design guidelines, because that would make a big difference. If you were a homeowner in the community and you were putting forth your proposed change, whatever it is, and you felt it met the community guidelines, but all of a sudden you're faced with, oh, it doesn't meet the historic overlay district guidelines. So maybe, maybe my question about the consistency of the guidelines at the historic overlay district level and the community level, maybe that should be move to a little bit later in this evening's presentation. But since it was all smushed together in the presentation, I just bring it up now. And that really is all. I mean, I am supportive of having the historic overlay district, but again, my concerns are that there's not, we don't know what at least 30% of the people think about it who live there. And the second is that we didn't get, well, really three then. Two is we didn't get much feedback tonight. We only heard from two people. And the third is what's the consistency level between the community and the historic overlay district guidelines? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Michelle. Laura, I turn it over to you and the rest of the staff to respond to some of Michelle's questions.
Do you want me to respond to the design guideline comments now or defer to later?
So Michelle, I think part of the reason we had the two presentations together was because the content was interlinked in some capacity. So we will still have a workshop session on the design guidelines that will happen. That is on our agenda, but I didn't want to try to fragment the presentation that talked about them holistically in some capacity. So Laura, I would leave it to your judgment if you feel like that's something more appropriate, but I think Michelle's raised some great questions for you all to address regarding the zoning question we have up for vote today.
Right. Thank you for bringing up the numbers about the poll, the community poll that we did to gauge support. The poll is not a requirement, but was a suggestion by the Supervisor Stork to make sure there was community interest. We have done, as Ms. Ward mentioned, I think it's 13, maybe 14 now, work group meetings. We had at least two, if not three, community meetings. I can't remember. COVID is a crazy time warp. 2 or 3 community meetings, as well as fielding questions and providing as much outreach as we can. The poll, as I said, is just one kind of piece of that's indicative of the community kind of views on the historic overlay district. Both of the community meetings that we had, I think there were 2, were very well attended. I think we had over 100 at the last community meeting we had for Holland Hills. So we have had community interest. And before COVID, we met in the Holland Meadows. It's a distant memory now, but the Holland Meadows Elementary School, and there were a significant number of people there, probably 50, 70, coming to hear about the initial kickoff of the project. So the county has done a lot of outreach trying to educate the community, receive their questions, identify concerns and comments. And also I know the work group and the Civic Association have also done outreach as well. I understand about the 30%, we don't know what they're thinking. I'm just not sure we're ever going to know, to be completely honest, when you do a poll. So I'm not sure about the outreach for tonight. We did advertise it. We have advertised all the public hearings. I'm anticipating there will be a number of people at the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors hearings, because those are also public meetings that have additional time to comment. We'll just have to see. But I'm going to defer the design guidelines till we get to a little bit later, just because I'm sure we'll have a lengthy discussion on that, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Michelle, do you have any other questions? Or all right, seeing a head shake of no. Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barbara Ward said this all got started in 2017, and I would respectfully disagree with that. I believe it was in 1994 that I made a presentation to the Civic Association of Holland Hills about various designations the community might seek to commemorate its upcoming 50th anniversary, which would have been in 1999. At that time, the Civic Association was adamantly opposed to the Historic Overlay District, but they agreed to set up a committee to study the possibility of being listed in the National Register. That was accomplished thanks to a second generation of people working on its advocacy. The one person I know who's helped spearhead that was Jerry Gibber. Thank you, Jerry, for that, if you're on the call. And that got listed in 2013. Now, 28 years later, we're on the cusp of getting approval for a historic overlay district. And I am grateful to be able to have been an advocate for this all along, and look forward to being able to vote on it when it comes to a motion.
All right. Thank you, John. Ms. Swan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have no comment, but I want to say that I applaud for the effort that staff and the community has been pouring to have the results presented today.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
Mr. Kalinsky.
All right, thank you. I think Holland Hills has kind of long been recognized in the architectural world as, as a significant find. Just amazed after all these years, particularly in this area, that there's been a lot of development pressure, and the fact that it's hasn't succumbed to that development pressure is great. Some of it, I think, may have to do with the style of the housing, the topography, the homeowners association. So, say all those forces coming together has really preserved something special and unique. And I think, if there's any example in this county that I could think of that is, say, more fit for a historic overlay district that's, not already in one, it would be, it would be Holland Hills. I couldn't think of anything else. So yeah, I am in support of it. A lot of architects flock there, and a lot of architects I know that live there respect it, and I think it has survived because of the stewardship of all the owners throughout the years, and hopefully many owners into the future can enjoy it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalinsky. Ms. Murray.
I represented the History Commission on the work group. So I spent a lot of time attending meetings, reading materials. And I think that a great deal of work has been done and a great deal of deliberation. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, a lot of thanks to people, but I think it's time to go forward and approve this.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Ms. Orr.
I've also been on the work group, and I was impressed with Laura's ability to hear both sides and speak kindly but respectfully. And anyway, she was quite a great professional. We have quite a wonderful lady in her. We're fortunate, and I'm supportive of this. And I think possibly people are going to reserve their questions and their comments for the Board of Supervisors, is my thought. So.
Thank you very much. Mr. Plumpy.
Sure thing. I thought the presentation was great. I really don't have no comment. I did, Ms. Audrey, I think you mentioned something to the effect that you're worried about that was only 30% or 66% that contributed to the survey, but I really feel that's actually pretty good, in my opinion, by using this format. And I think it was great, and it wasn't required. So people know, and people talk among each other. So I feel it's out there, and if someone doesn't speak up or have a really bad issue with it, so be it. Life has to move on, but I'm really in favor of this, and I'm looking forward to supporting it. So great work, y'all. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Mr. Zellman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Ms. Murray and Ms. Orr, I was also a part of the work group, and I want to thank Laura and Sarah and the folks at Traceries for all the work that they've done. I would certainly echo the yeoman's work that Laura did, dealing with many different views on the work group. And while we still have some work to go on the guidelines, if the district gets approved, I think we've come a long way I would probably agree with Kay. I think a lot of people have strong opinions and maybe reserving them for later. We certainly heard those opinions, but I think I agree with folks that I think it is time. This has been pending for a while, and the district creating the historic overlay district has my support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Zellman. It feels like ages ago, and it actually was almost a year ago when I actually attended one of the Holland Hills Workgroup meetings back in January of 2021. And I was impressed by the amount of discourse and discussion that occurred in just the one that I took part in. So I have to commend that effort. I think Fairfax County, and particularly the county that we administer to as the ARB, is rather unique in the sense that we have several independent cities within us that have large collections of historic buildings that are presided over other boards for their treatment of their historic properties. And I think Holland Hills represents a very unique resource and a unique opportunity for historic overlay districts in the county, in my mind. I agree with several of the architects on our board that it is truly somehow become a gem that takes the investment of their own owners and the community itself to protect and preserve that. And I think that, in my mind, it's a chance for us to continue to pick up that tradition, that it's already in place and now we should really canonize it, in my mind. But that's my personal opinion on it. I appreciate all the input received, and I agree with Mr. Plumpy that participation at that levels, I wish sometimes folks wish other elections would get that level of participation and voting. So I'm quite happy to hear that we were able to get that much feedback. And I agree with Laura and the staff that obviously the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors meetings will give chances for other opportunities for public to provide comment. So we've heard some here. So, and Laura, I think we at least know that you and Denise have some questions to address for some folks. So at least to help clarify that on that end, if this does become an HOD, but that's always a challenge we have anytime helping educate. With that in mind, I don't have any other comments. And I, as the chair, cannot introduce a motion, but I would look to a member of the ARB if there is no other discussion to introduce a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Zellman.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the ARB recommend for approval action item ARB 22-MTV-01 Holland Hills Historic Overlay District Zoning Ordinance Amendment, Plan Amendment 2018-IV-MV4, and Rezoning 2021-MV-00017 for the potential Holland Hills Historic Overlay District, consisting of 492 parcels located within tax map grids 93-1, 93-3, 93-4, and 102-1 to create a new historic overlay district for the Holland Hills Historic District, as submitted and presented at the February 10, 2022 ARB meeting. Upon review of the materials, the proposal is found to meet the requirements of Zoning Ordinance 3101-Historic Overlay Districts.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Ms. Orr. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that presentation. We got your recommendation to take forward with, and I believe that is the last item we have for action, which takes us into our workshop. Thank you very much to any of the members of the public that provided your comments. And I will highlight that Laura pointed out there are several other opportunities in which this item will be brought up, and one may avail themselves there as well. So thank you very much for your participation. We move ourselves into the workshop session of our meeting. We're going to keep the same players on the field, and this is going to be the design guidelines, ARB 22 MTV 02 WS Holland Hill Historic Overlay District Design Guidelines. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Laura Arsenault. Laura, I know you've already given us a presentation on the guidelines. As indicated before, since we felt that content was going to be helpful for any member of the public that was viewing this, we wanted to make sure they had all that information on the table for them if they wanted to comment on any of that. You do have the one comment by Miss Murray, and I think once you speak to hers, I'll go, or sorry, not by Miss Murray, Miss Aubrey. Sorry. Sorry, Michelle. Sorry, Elise. I've only gotten 3 hours of sleep last night, so that's why. I get to use that excuse at least once. But that being said, I know, Laura, you have the one question from Michelle regarding the two guideline sets, both this potential set of guidelines and the existing design guidelines. After you speak to that, I think I'll go around and let anyone else who has any questions on the guidelines bring up any questions for you. And I believe we still have Sarah, because yeah, there she is.
Great, thank you, Mr. Daniel. So when we looked at the design guidelines are required for the ARB to have if the historic overlay district is adopted. And Ms. Aubrey very astutely pointed out, the Holland Hills already has a design review committee that has their own design guidelines. We considered at the beginning and discussed, you know, adopting those, looking at those, reviewing those. However, we were charged with different regulations and criteria when we looked at the resources. So therefore, we needed to make our own design guidelines, which is why we brought on Trace Rees and Sarah Vonish and Laura Hughes to work with us on creating the design guidelines. I do want to acknowledge your point that there are two different sets of design guidelines now. Well, there might be two different, sorry, let me back up. Two different sets of design guidelines might be in play. We have talked with the community about how a building permit may come in and what that might mean. County standard practice is we do not consider covenants or community civic associations in county policy and you know, research and analysis. Therefore, we have to have our complete own set of design guidelines to work on. We've been trying to work with the community about streamlining a process for a homeowner, but at this point, I think we'll just have to see how the process goes and address it accordingly.
But Laura, just so I've got that clear,
Sure.
this ARB, if Holland Hills is going to become an HOD, this ARB can take into account the opinions of those separate bodies. So, Michelle, for context, were an application to come to us, a letter or indication of approval by the design board of Holland Hills could be included with an application as supplementary material. Similar to what we've seen other applications like at Laurel Hill have their own letters of support from community associations and other groups. So I just want to caveat that while Laura is very politic in her statement there about how the county treats another entity's guidelines, we as the ARB can obviously, through public comment and through other processes, take into consideration. And I guess the real question I want to know, and on top of Michelle's question, is who's the higher standard? Are the design guidelines higher than ours, or are our design guidelines a more rigorous standard?
Okay.
Well, could I add in?
Sure.
I
Sure.
think the real question is, if I get approved by one body but not by the other, what happens? Do I have to get approval by both bodies in order to undertake whatever project I have proposed? But if I get a negative from either body, then that means I can't undertake my project at all. Is that how it would work out?
So the county historic overlay district is, if established, is tied to the building permit. So if the ARB recommends denial on an application, you cannot move forward with your building permit. If the Community Civic Association Design Review Committee still recommends you move forward, you can't get your building permit from the county. I'm spitballing here, but I
Right,
hope
right.
that
But
makes-
what if it's the other way around?
right.
What if, which is really the more important one, question of whether the county approves it, but the local community does not.
Or you
From
can't do it.
from the guidance that I've had from the county, we cannot enforce private covenants and restrictions. Therefore, if there was a concern between the design review committee of Holland Hills and the applicant, that would be a private matter and it wouldn't be a county regulated issue. Does that make sense?
Well, let me ask you something, Lauren. So could they get their permit from the county and go along building their things, knowing that they'll have a violation with their own association?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It would become and instead of a county versus citizen matter, it would be a private versus private matter.
So it's similar to what Reston has. Reston has its own design review committee as well as an overlay district, correct?
Correct. That's the example I used for the community. We appreciate the extra review if they want to provide it to the ARB, but they are not solely, they do not depend on each other to move forward.
So really it could be a difficult situation as a neighbor, especially in Holland Hills, if they do something, but people talk, they know the association did not approve it, but they got the permit. It could be a sticky wicket, but nothing's perfect, I guess, unfortunately.
And this is not an issue just with historic overlay districts as well as the private versus private. As you know, most communities have much more stringent regulations with their homeowners associations and things. So it comes up a lot more often than, but this.
I was going to say, Laura, this is something, and I am not an attorney, but this is something that could then play out more with its private with
correct
legal action between each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I think, Michelle, what I wanted to get at is I think you hit the nail on the head there about there are two ways this could go. And if someone comes to us with an approval already from the community design board, I think in most cases, looking at the guidelines as they've been developed, the draft guidelines by Sarah's group and everything, they are going to be consistently in line with what we are already seeking. There's going to be I see a very little opportunity for us to come into disagreement in that end. I've seen similar situations where we've played out with VDHR in the past, where we have approved one thing and VDHR has not approved another thing. My hope anytime, and I think it's all of our hopes, is that we always are trying to get an application to yes in the most reasonable way possible. So my hope is that that is an anomaly situation, that we have guidelines that have the flexibility that are sensitive to the properties, but aren't so prescriptive. And I think that's kind of hearkening to what Mr. Mobley and Mr. Bierce brought up in their time, that we're not catching ourselves in a way that we're going to be trapping an applicant in a back and forth between their private to private and the ARB if we're reviewing applications. At least that's my hope in looking at the guidelines as they're written in this draft form.
And Chris, if I could add to the fact that the guidelines are recommendations and they're not prescriptive. So if we run into an issue, that sort of issue, like you said, the ARB could negotiate that and work with the applicant to address it. Chris, I don't know if you wanted me to address I think it's Mr. Brusco's comments on the design guidelines.
I would be happy for you to speak to him because I believe if he is still participating.
I think I just checked and he's still here. I'm
and
waiting
I would
to
be
Mr.
happy
Brusco.
for you to speak to that.
Sure. So the question was, if I remember right, and is that would the design guidelines align with national preservation standards about additions coming on that would look similar to, but not exactly the same to the existing original structures. Mr. Brusco and I had emailed back and forth on this, and I'm sure he wants clarification from the ARB members as well. As I'm not an architect, I can't speak directly to that. But that the architecture is a subjective matter, and it would be on a case-by-case basis when it comes in to determine whether or not the addition proposed and a number of forms would align with the design guidelines. So that is my response to that, but I would defer to the architects on the ARB if they wanted to allow, or anyone else, I'm sorry. If they
Well, what I would say, and obviously I would love to hear the observations of our architects, but I think one of the key things with the SOI standards is particularly there is the acknowledgement of differentiating old from new, but that they'll be compatible. So in the standards themselves, there is almost an inherent they need to be different, but they have to work together, which is one of those like almost like a sitcom, she's this and he's that. How will they ever make it work? But that's what the guidelines are striving to achieve, is that yes, you should be able to differentiate old from new, but it shouldn't be so different that it radically draws attention away from the historic property. At least as an architectural historian, that's what I'm looking for when I'm interpreting it, and that's what I currently think. And I'm going to look at them again. Obviously, that's why you've sent the draft guidelines to us again. But that's what I'm aiming to see that flexibility for. Is I don't want to stifle new design in additions, but I also don't want to magnify them. At least that's mine. I obviously would defer to any of our architects or other members who might have an observation to add on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Burns.
Yeah, hi. The raise hand feature doesn't seem to be working. Mine's been up for a while, but nobody acknowledged.
Oh, I see it, John.
Okay,
sorry.
I've turned it off since I'm now speaking. In terms of the requirement in the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation regarding additions being differentiated but compatible, I explain that as a pendulum, and it can swing to extremes. So someone can come in and say, I want to put in 6 panel doors and 12 over 12 light windows with shutters on it because it will be suitably differentiated from the rest of my original Holland Hills house. And then the response to that is, yeah, but it's not compatible. And the other end of the pendulum is, I'm going to put up something and I'm going to go out and I'm going to get salvaged materials from other communities that I'm going to put in. And, and that's the pendulum moving in the other direction. So that, they can move back and forth. But in the end, I think it is a reasonableness test, which is also in the Secretary of the Interior Standards. It says that they should be applied in a reasonable manner. And when we did the addition on our house, I discovered that you can no longer get T111 siding, which is the original siding on our house. The currently available siding, which many people call T111, is actually something called Type 303 siding, which has a very coarse sanded texture as opposed to the smooth siding of the T111, and it has beveled grooves as opposed to the square edge grooves in the original T111. And so you can argue that that is suitably differentiated material because it has different physical characteristics from the original. So, you can get down into nuances that are very, very small and claim that you have met the requirement for being differentiated. And so I don't see that that's a big thing. In terms of one set of guidelines potentially being in conflict with the other, recognize that the ARB is only concerned with that which requires a building permit. And so replacing your front door, or putting a new roof on, or putting a fence up, or a shed in the backyard, that's not going to require ARB approval, but it will still require design review committee approval within the community. So there's, these things overlap, yes, but in some areas, each one is independent of the other. So I would hope maybe there needs to be at some point some form of liaison between the ARB and the community's design review committee. Perhaps the model of the working group that got this thing all going is something that we might look to address issues should they come up. And I would assume that our ability to approve the proposed guidelines that the traceries folks have put together is something that can be changed or amended because these are approved at our discretion.
Thank you, John. Well, I think unless there's any more discussion on this topic, John, if you had any other comments, I'll go around alphabetically to discuss the guidelines in general. I didn't know if you had any other observations or comments, or if that's.
You want to go back to Michelle first?
I didn't know if Michelle had any other observations. She's shaking her head at me, so I didn't see that she had any more.
Okay, then I'll go ahead. The only other comments I have is that, and I have already relayed this to Laura, is that looking at the map quickly as she had it up on my tiny little laptop screen, that there are several of the things that were listed as non-contributing that I might argue should be, and there are things that appear to be contributing that I might argue shouldn't be. So is that something that will be cast in stone with the Board of Supervisors approval, or is that something that the ARB can discuss when we approve the guidelines?
For the contributing and non-contributing structure specifically?
Yes.
Staff is making a recommendation to the board to adopt a certain number of contributing and a certain number of non-contributing. I think it's 454 contributing and 38 non-contributing. If there's concerns about which structures are contributing and non-contributing, I would strongly recommend putting them in writing and listing them out. The recommendations that we made are solely staff alone. With discussion with the work group and the community, but if there's disagreement with that, please put them in written comment, and we can elevate that to the supervisor to take into consideration.
Okay, so the comments go to you as staff person?
They could,
For the
yeah.
Planning Commission, or I mean,
You can send them to me, and I can send them to staff. At this point, the staff report is published, so we're not going to change what we have probably in there specifically. But if there's certain property, that's why I said put it in writing, and then if you want to, I would recommend sending it to the Planning Commission specifically, and I can send you that information. And then that way, and then CC me or copy me and Denise, and then that way we just have a record of it for consideration.
And if I were to do that, I would be doing that as an individual. Is that correct?
I believe so, unless the ARB decides as a whole they do not believe that they agree with you that the properties are contributing or non-contributing.
Well, since I have nothing in writing for the ARB to consider,
then I would assume you would do it privately.
that I will do that as an individual. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That I can do. Thank you, and I will echo again multiple congratulations to you, to Nicole Brannon, to everybody else who's involved, to the Traceries folks who put this all together and went through countless meetings, not just with the communities, groups and such, but also with us on the ARB that led us to this evening's vote. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, John. That takes us on to, why am I forgetting? Don't remember our alphabet now. Ms. Swan.
Mr. Chairman, no comments. A lot of appreciation.
All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Kalinsky.
Just the guidelines, I think, are very well conceived. I know they may not cover every instance, but they're just that, they're guidelines. And I think that the board will consider each case on an individual basis. And I think that's critical, that, everybody has a chance to present their project and go through the merits and discuss it and make their case. So I'm comfortable with what we're moving forward with. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Murray.
To be honest, I've had a lot of opportunity to comment in the past, and I haven't had any comments for the last few drafts. And I feel that way tonight. I think it's very good, and it's good. We're just going to have to start living with it and see how it works out.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Orr.
That's a very good comment. We'll just have to live with it and see how it works. I worry that somebody's going to take it and try to use it prescriptively, but hopefully not. So.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Plumpy.
Yeah, it's weird. I was going to say the same thing, Ms. Orr, what Ms. Murray said. So right on target. So I'm supportive. So good job.
All right, Mr. Zellman.
The only thing I was going to address, Mr. Chairman, was some of the concerns about the conflicts between the design guidelines and our process. And rest assured, there are plenty of attorneys like me who get involved in these HOA disputes when somebody wants to do something and the HOA doesn't approve of it for whatever reason, or does approve of it and they don't like it. So that's normally how those things are worked out. That's all I had.
All right, thank you, sir. I would agree. I think what I said earlier when we were talking about the zoning recommendation, that this is a wholly unique situation we find ourselves in, just in comparison to the other HODs we have. Even the closest comparison in my mind, which might be Lake Ann, just doesn't compare in what we have here. So I think we've got a really good document so far in draft. And obviously, I'm going to advocate that everyone continue to take another look at it to get any more feedback to Sarah, so that when we do have to take this up for a vote, we can do it with confidence. And I guess the questions I would put to you, Laura, in particular is, what are you seeking comments on what we have now? And then you anticipated likely seeing something in April, I believe is what you were saying. If everything goes forward and if the HOD is taken up, then we would need to vote on it pretty much in following up on that, so that we were be ready for any applications coming in, because we want to have guidelines for our new HOD if that's where we're headed here.
Yeah, one of the reasons of having the design guidelines workshop tonight was a possible approval of the design guidelines on March 10th, which would be 2 days after the board makes their motion on the historic overlay district. So there would be limited time between if the board approved it and if the ARB approved the design guidelines. That being said, if there's large changes that need to be done, I was just looking at my calendar, if there's large changes and we need to get back with the consultant and Sarah and Laura and work on those, and we need additional time, that's perfectly fine. But my question, Chris, would be that I'm looking at the calendar, and that in order to meet the March 10th ARB submission deadlines, this is when we'd have to have them kind of ready to go, which would be the 24th of February, which is 2 weeks from today. So if we don't have major comments, or probably need comments by the end, I'm going to say, I'm only going to give you a little bit of time, February 16th or something, so that we can get back and make any major comments. We're just kind of tight on that timeline. However, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. That being said, we have large comments, we have community concern, we can keep working on the draft of the design guidelines. There's nothing that says we need to adopt them right away if the board adopts the historic overlay district.
Well, and Laura, similar to obviously this item today, we're going to have to take this one up for a vote and afford any public comment on that item as well, correct?
Correct.
So obviously we'll want I think we need to be watching this next bits of conversation to see where we get any input like that. I do think the comment today from one member of the public is fairly, salient about, and I think Mr. Klinsky kind of pointed out, I almost feel like we have a HOD that could almost in the future be historic for how many architects might reside there. It's almost like a fruit fly trap for architects is what I'm starting to feel like. But that being said, we want to make sure that we're taking into account any of that feedback we hear about confusion or discrepancies between obviously known standards that have been issued and what we're putting out there. So yeah, I encourage anyone who's got comments, please get them as soon as you can to Laura and Sarah. And we're going to look forward to seeing you all again in the near future.
In case you didn't see them, the draft design guidelines are in the staff report. That's the latest version of them. We do have some minor cleanup edits that we're working on. Sarah and I have a list, so please feel free to add to that list. But I'll send out another email early next week, maybe Tuesday, with a reminder if you have any comments to get them to us.
Thank you, Laura. All right. Well, that takes us out of our workshop session. Making good time tonight, I feel like. So that takes us on to, we have no presentations, and takes us on to board and staff items. First on the agenda, as always, is review and action of approval of previous month's minutes. Denise, did you get any comments on the meeting minutes that were sent out?
Yes, we did. We got one comment from Mr. Burns about recusal. I'm sorry, I have an echo.
I think it's Mr. Zellman. Let's try it now.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah. But I believe that has been, the minutes have been revised to reflect Mr. Burns' comments, and revision was sent out last Friday.
All right, are there any other members that have any revisions to add to the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion accepting them as revised by Mr. Burns' comments and paying the recording secretary.
Mr. Secretary, or Mr. Chairman? Oh, boy. I move that the ARB approve the minutes from the January meeting as revised and approve payment to the recording secretary for the January minutes.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Kalinsky. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Cut that check. All right, onward to Treasurer's Report. Janice, how are we sitting with the coffers?
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm not going to make a judgment about that, but I will tell you what happened in the past month. So there were a few minor adjustments, 47 cents to two adjustments of 47 cents. There were two payments to the clerk that were made, one for the November 21st meeting minutes and one for the December 21st meeting minutes. You had a starting balance of $20,446.70, and you ended with a balance of $19,345.19.
All right, any questions for Denise on that item? All right, seeing none. Administrative membership contact information update. I know Denise is seeking everyone's information. Denise, you want to call out who hasn't gotten back to you? I knew I was one of the guilty at one point.
I left this in here just in case I had to ask you all again, but everybody has now reported to me their contact status. So thank you very much. And those changes have been submitted to the clerk.
You know, Denise, I'm going to piggyback on this real quick. Did you also get updates from everyone regarding our training for the last year for NAPC?
I did not receive updates from everyone, but those who did respond, they were included in the CLG report, the annual report.
All right, thank you. All right, unless there are any other administrative items, I think that takes us on to discussion update reports. Homes Run Acres HOD update?
Yes, so staff will be working with the community to conduct a poll similar to the poll that Laura just described for Holland Hills. It was important to the Civic Association that they receive that feedback. So we'll be working with them over the next month or two to create that poll. The next work group meeting is on February 16th at 6:30, and Sarah Vonish will be joining us to discuss the latest version of the design guidelines, and we'll be discussing the poll structure with the work group. For rezoning cases, original Mount Vernon High School, you all saw, they came, I think it was December that they came and presented. They're probably going to be coming back March or April. It's looking more like April for a recommendation. And this is for the repurposing and reuse of the original Mount Vernon High School. There are no current Section 106 cases that I'm aware of to report on. And I had a request from Mr. Burns about the manufactured housing task force. I elevated that to management, and I just have not heard anything back yet.
John, did you have anything you wanted to add on that topic? Since I know I recently saw some of the conversation about it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I saw in the redevelopment up at, I forget what it's called, up behind Chuck E. Cheese, for those of us who live in the Mount Vernon district, it abutted up against a manufactured house, a trailer park, manufactured housing, and also a property that was associated with the Quander family. And so I had some questions about that and how it will affect, because on that rezoning, it marked the trailer park as a site for future redevelopment. So I did some digging and discovered that there is this manufactured housing task force, and one of the stated goals of that is to preserve manufactured housing. And most of that's in the Route 1 corridor in the Mount Vernon district. And so I asked Denise, so they're talking preservation. So are we involved in that? Are you involved in that? Has anybody talked to or even thought to talk to you about that? And so as a result of that inquiry, she's elevated that up. And I'm not terribly surprised there's no response yet, but I hope that there is a response because there is a significant percentage of the affordable housing in the Mount Vernon district is in that form of housing. And it's a housing type, and it's, I don't think that it's a housing type that's been studied very many places at all. And so maybe here's an opportunity for us to do it, particularly if the county's targeting it for redevelopment.
And John, one thing I've learned being on the Reston Task Force is that we have to be super clear when we say the word preservation and affordable housing, because they use that word too. Yeah. And I saw so many people think they thought I had two heads when I said that. And I'm like, no, I'm referring to the historic preservation of affordable housing.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I thought it was you're right. It's one of those, just like modern architecture, that it's, and the current stuff that's coming in with ranch homes and stuff. I wonder if VDHR has even thought about talking about that as a housing type.
And in the Mount Vernon Gazette, I think it was last week, they had an article about one of them recently sold to a private developer, despite the tenants attempting to band together and get state and county support to purchase it themselves. And so now it's in the hands of a private developer. So that's, there's, the storm clouds are gathering in terms of that particular housing type in the Mount Vernon district.
But I think it's great. And Denise, hopefully you do get some headway on it, because I want us to keep being on more task force. I'm hoping that becomes a common consideration, is that, and if there's merit for it, an ARB member could be on a task force. And I'll use that to segue into the task force I'm on and just give you all an update on that. The Reston Comprehensive Plan one is going well at this point. One of the last meetings that just happened brought together what they think is the tentatively voted on sections to go out for an initial wave of public consideration. So to groups like the Reston Association, other groups, there'll be some presentations. So in the next few months, I think there's going to start to be efforts in which we're going to start seeing some of that language that's coming out of the task force. What I'll say is the heritage section is far expanded from what we had in the previous one. Obviously, once that comes out, I hope Denise and Laura will share it around. It's gone through a bit of staff review, but I don't think it says anything that would surprise any of y'all. And if anything, it's emphasizing things. I'll also point out that when it does come out, hopefully it still stays in there. The land use section talks about how there are tax credit incentives for using buildings like those on Association Drive that are there. So, I find that just an observation of being on this one is if we have our voices there, we can add those bits of language into those sections of these comp plans, because the folks doing these they don't always dawn on the community of that's an opportunity that can be emphasized. Even in the equity section that's being written, there's emphasis on heritage resources being a priority because that helps define the place we live in. So great opportunity there, I think. Hopefully once it comes out, we'll all get to take a look at it. I would guess since we're in discussions and updates on the same Reston Lake Ann area, let me give you an update. So last month we talked about the Lake Ann supplementary study that we were seeking IDIQ costs for, and that the Gupta Foundation had reached out to us and offered to potentially fund that study. After talking with county staff, I indicated that we could accept those funds if they were offered to the county. The county could accept them and potentially use those. Since then, only recently there was and I believe it's just about a week ago, or no, it's about a week ago on February 1st, the Board of Supervisors approved tweaking the current budget for the county that included a $250,000 master planning and visioning study for the aging village center at Lake Ann, as they described it. And what I found out from Denise, unless I'm mistaken, Denise, is part of those funds that will include funding our supplementary study. So it seems as though the county has decided to lift up the mantle, correct, Denise? Yes, she's nodding her head. So
yes, that is correct.
So the great thing is, obviously, we put the letter out there. We're still being mentioned in many of these little articles at the local level about what we've asked. And the money that the Supervisor Alcorn sought is going to help support that. So I think that's great. I've indicated to him that if this visioning study and master planning effort does, include members of the public or boards, that we would like to be a part of that in some capacity to help inform that, because any kind of redevelopment or work that takes place at Lake Ann is going to require building permits and ultimately is going to come over here to us. So I've indicated that, and I know that's still slow moving, but I wanted to give everyone an update on that item as well.
Mr. Chairman, or Denise or Laura, has there been any movement on the suggestion that the county needs to fund a more thorough investigation of the deficiencies of the current architectural fabric there, and augment the Samaha report?
Beyond the historic preservation report that the ARB has requested?
Yeah, well, I guess, what was it we requested? My recollection is that we were requesting that they do a further study to look at other options than just those limited in the Samaha report, that would include a more thorough analysis of the structural deficiencies and such like that. Is that what this money is going for?
So the scope was written to view the Samaha report through the lens of historic preservation. So that would be applying the Secretary of the Interior standards to those treatments that they had suggested that clearly would be inappropriate, specifically, but to everything. So looking at that report through the lens of the Secretary of the Interior standards, but then also supplementing the information with rehabilitation tax credit information. It is a National Register property. So that would be in addition to, so that's an extra beyond just looking at what the engineering report had provided, the information the engineering report had provided. And Chris, okay. I don't mean to steal, but do you mind if I just put a call out? So we do have this money, and we were going to ask Mr. Daniel if he would ask one of the ARB members if they would be willing to be on a selection advisory committee to review the proposals that we received and make a selection of the consultant that would be working with.
You're not stealing my thunder at all.
Okay, so
that was the other point. So with the county, the county has to then select someone to do this, but there's a whole process that obviously we don't get to pick as the ARB, but they can form a committee that could include a member of the ARB. I told Denise that I would bring that up tonight as if someone wanted to be on that. Denise indicated it would be probably a minor commitment, but it would require obviously looking at the scopes, looking at the company's submissions and making a decision on them. Obviously, if nobody chooses to, nobody wants to, I wouldn't call it drawing a short stick, but I will be happy to do so. But I wanted to bring it to all the board members to say if there's someone who has an interest in particular. and I know we have several architects, so I wouldn't want to discount their expertise in this in particular. Or, you know, Mr. Zellman just wanting to get out of his comfort zone. And no one has to say anything about that right now. Obviously, this isn't something that requires an action, but if you feel like you would want to help, Denise, I don't know if you want to give a little info on what this would require. It's a small commitment, but we can't all help give a recommendation as to who the county might select. We can only provide some advice as to how they make a choice.
No, that's correct. Thank you. I'm envisioning we do a little homework, read the background information about the consultants, read the proposals that were submitted, and then come together as a group, probably an hour and a half worth of discussion, maybe, and make a selection based on what we've determined. There will probably be some scoring, a rubric that I will create for scoring that I would pass out before, provide the ARB member that was willing to work with us.
Well, I've got the big mouth, so I would volunteer. But I would defer to Samantha because she lives in Reston if she's interested in it.
Well, John, I certainly think you are way more qualified than I do. I do interested, but I think it really should John taking the task. Yeah.
So if no one else speaks up, I would be happy to participate.
Thank you.
Glad you say so.
Well,
Okay, so
with that in mind, it sounds like, unless there's someone else, and I'm not seeing anybody, John, I think you might be on deck for that.
Okay.
thanks very much. I'll get back in touch with you.
Again, as said, I think this is exciting in the sense that the county is funding it, which instead of us having to pull from our own purse. And I think the big question, Denise, that I might want answered is we had some options on some of those. Finding out how far we're going to go with that and if we're going to get some of those options, and because some of them included even an audit of the previous assessment, and there's lots of things that we don't get to make some of those calls because it's the county spending money, but it'd be curious to see what options they might want to pick up. So we'll look forward to more updates on that in the future. All right, I don't think, unless there are any other updates or discussion items, we can go on to correspondence. Not seeing any indications or hands raised. Correspondence announcements. Chairman Mckay's response to our courthouse repairs letter. So Denise shared that with all of us. We sent a letter and we got a reply. I welcome discussion on it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Zellman.
I appreciate the chairman replying. I think it might be worth reaching out, and I'm happy to do it, to reach out to our contacts. I'm thinking of Heather Bollinger over in the clerk's office, because I know that he presented a timeline, and it seems like we're getting into fiscal year 2024, I think it was, before we get to that portion of the repairs. And I just would like to maybe speak to Ms. Bollinger and maybe Clerk Fry if necessary to see how they feel about that timeline, or if they feel maybe any follow-up is necessary or anything. Because I know they had some concerns about the status of the courthouse, and we're talking at least a couple of years before starting.
Yeah, no, Mr. Kalinsky, yes, just saw your hand, Steve.
A little bit discouraging, just, there was certainly urgency in your letter to the chairman, and then he, said that, they had working into their budgets, et cetera. But I mean, that the slow progress there is probably going to do some irreparable harm along the way. It'd be great if there's a way to, if there was another mechanism that the county had for an emergency repair, but done right. And that's the thing that I'm just not aware. But I could see all the forces in action, and I could see where this was headed, and looks like it's going to be a long time before it gets properly addressed. And that's just very discouraging.
No, that was going to be a similar kind of impression I got, that a lot of this is time and money was what I read from this letter here. This time, lots of time and lots of money still needs to be spent. And I agree. I mean, I just suffered some ice jacking on my house over this last round of winter storms that I was unable to deal with. And I don't have failing mortar joints. Unlike the facade of not even the facade, the structural walls of the courthouse, that if we've got that much water permeation going on and this kind of cycle we're getting with the winters, I mean, you're right. We're likely going to see more damage take place. And so it is a little disconcerting to, every year that goes by, it's going to cost more in my mind. But I mean, obviously, Jason, if you get any input from the folks, the contacts that reached out to us to see what they might have to say, maybe we can continue this conversation further, or maybe there are even some actual spot repairs that could be done to kind of at least slow some of the damage in some of this. I think the other concern was, at least if that's going to even happen, it's done right too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Michelle.
It seems to me also that they were putting their regular, already in motion schedule ahead of anything else, and they were just appending this to the end of it. Whereas you would think that if a building is going to fall down, it would be better to spend some money sooner to protect it from falling down, rather than spending money to tear down 2 wings of another building. I mean, those 2 wings that are going to come down that have already been agreed to demolish, they should go at the end of the line and have preservation of some buildings that need desperate repair come before that.
Sadly, in my day-to-day profession, I have never seen anyone use demolition by neglect for good. It's always been used for ill. I wish. No, you're right, and I think if we get a little bit more information on what the folks at the courthouse maybe feel about this situation, and obviously, Denise, I don't know how much DPD has any sway in this, but I do think there are things that can be done in the interim. There is cyclical maintenance that can be done, even in these big project numbers. There are things that can be done if they're done right to at least, keep these structures from suffering more damage. So I don't know if there's any solutions here on that, or if we're kind of in a well, we spoke our piece kind of situation. And I saw Laura come up on screen, so I feel like she's got something to say.
Listening. I wanted to address your comments, Michelle, about the wings in the rear being removed and why that was like a top priority for them. The reason that's a top priority is they're reorienting the front of the courthouse to basically be the rear and putting a new entrance on that. And they want to activate the master. This is from my experience of the master plan process at the courthouse, at the Judicial Center, that was their like #1 priority, was to activate that piece. And we had brought up, as staff associated with the project, we had brought up these concerns throughout the project, but I just wanted to let you know the timing of why that was happening was because they want to activate the other side and get their master plan and new buildings put in instead of doing that maintenance first. So
it makes me think of the high school and the fact that the original historic entrance is basically becoming a pretty ceremonial entrance. And I would hate that 10, 15 years down the line, we're dealing with damage to that side of that building because it's not getting the attention because the fancy new side gets all the attention. So, I mean, you mentioned the master planning process there, and that's long since gone, but I think that's all the more important, that why I'm happy we're in the conversation right now about this one with the high school, so that we can continue to emphasize the importance of those spaces. I don't know if there are any other members that have comments on this one. Not seeing any. Jason, just let us know what you might hear on that front.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll reach out to Ms. Bollinger tomorrow. I'll copy you and Denise on that. And obviously we'll hear back from them and see what we want to do.
Thank you very much. Old business, bylaws updates. We got any updates on those bylaws yet?
We do. So I wanted to let you know that I'm not sure where I left it with you all, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But the county attorney's office was reviewing the bylaws, both the History Commission bylaws and the Architectural Review Board bylaws, the revisions. It's come out of the county attorney's office, and the approval of the bylaws has been delayed by internal review process. We prepared a memo which is going to go to the board prior to the board's approval of the bylaws. And that will allow them an opportunity to have a conversation with staff to get clarification about the Section 106 process and the consulting party status. Because it's not an ordinary administrative update, it's sort of a policy update, if you will. We felt that the board needed an opportunity to have a conversation with staff before they received these and were passed along under an administrative review, which is typically how these bylaws revisions are reviewed by the board. So that's where it is. I just got the director's signature, and it'll be going, both sets of bylaws will be going to the board under a cover memo, and then we can have an opportunity for conversation if anybody has any questions. So that's the update about the bylaws.
All right. How long do we think that's going to take?
A month.
All right. If they ever want to know about 106, I'm always happy to tell them about it.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. We may pull you in.
All right. Any further questions on that? I think we've all seen those updates. We're just waiting to, once they get locked in, it'll be great. Any other old business? Not hearing any. We got new business plus update.
Plus, yes. So the Architectural Review Board applications have started to be submitted exclusively through Plus, which is the Planning Land Use System, PLUS. So it's an online system, and there's a application form that they fill out. We're hoping that it makes things easier for us and easier for you all. But from the ARB's perspective, there probably won't be much change. I'll still be sending you the submitted application packets. You'll still receive the communications through me. We'll still have the share file system. That may change down the road, but I think it will help with us with doing research on cases. Laura has been really hustling in the last month to try to get all of the historical cases scanned so we can get them into the Plus system. So in preparation for staff reports. So we're working, Plus will, I believe, help expedite that process once that gets going. And we have it, we've been thinking about it, and it's built into the system. So I think ultimately it's a positive thing. Right now there are just some bumps as we adopt it, and I'm sure I will still be working pretty closely with the applicants to make sure that they understand the system and what they need to submit is submitted and on time. So, but I would like to take an opportunity when our schedule is not too busy to just show you all the that face, what the public face looks like of this system, just so you can look at it and see what the applicant's looking at. But I thought that this meeting was going to be much longer than it turned out to be, so I didn't put it on the schedule for tonight.
Thanks, Denise. Yeah, let's try to find another month where we don't have a crazy agenda. It would be very helpful to see what you see on your end, but I'm happy to hear that it's not going to alter much on our end. Hopefully that makes it easier to eventually get to staff reports one day.
That's the goal.
Mr. Chairman, a question.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Burns.
How far back will the scanning of the historical records go in terms of years? I mean, is it 1 year or 10 years or 20 years or?
No, I'm glad Laura popped on because this is her baby.
The question is, how far back do you want them to go? No, I'm taking them back to 2000. So that's 22 years of history of it. And that's when Bruce Kavitsky, who was here before Linda, and had kind of their transfer. So we have pretty good files up to that point. We have files either further back from them, but they're not in a shape that we can really work with right now. So the real push is to get up to 2000, and then as Denise mentioned, they'll all be public facing, and they'll be a very, very helpful document for all of us when researching and giving the public information about approved cases. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Survey and or other priorities.
Yes, so we came to you a month or two ago and talked, Mr. Daniel brought up the idea of the Architectural Review Board maybe thinking about its priorities in the future. And I wanted to revisit that conversation because the CLG grant cycle and the cost share grant cycle through BDHR just opened. Both applications I think are due in early April. I'm not positive about that. I just received the cost share. I think I got the CLG last week. We have done both the Reston survey and the African American historical sites survey through the cost share grant, and we have completed the National Register nomination for the Pride of Fairfax, which is the Oddfellows, the old Oddfellows Hall in Gum Springs, through the CLG grant. And I wanted to bring this to the Architectural Review Board's attention in case you had anything that, any resource that was out there that you really felt very strongly about needed to be surveyed, or National Register nomination needed to be written. That's an opportunity for us to partner with the state, both financially and of course just supportively, to get those things done. One thing that, you know, Lauren and I were kicking around was a county-wide survey, and I've heard it mentioned a couple of times, of modern architectural resources. I know that that is a state priority. With the loss of the most recent loss of the Marcel Brewer home in Long Island, in the last couple of weeks, it's come to our attention again that these resources aren't necessarily identified or aren't necessarily elevated the way they should be or could be. And I think that that might be an easy reach for us, just in the sense of what we know about the resources. There are other things that I think that we could survey, but I also think that there's a pressing need to maybe elevate these for the next cost share grant cycle. So I wanted to get your opinion, and also just kind of survey the crowd to see what you all, if you have a site that you think, oh, you know, we really have to get a National Register nomination written for this, it's halfway done, let's just get it over the line, something like that. I'd be interested in hearing your opinions.
Did that one house in McLean was able to say that was on the market? That's a mansion that was built in the 1800s.
The Cornwell Farm, yeah. It's It is listed on the National Register, but it is still up for sale.
But it's slated for the guy's going to demolish it though.
Well, I believe that right now the intention is to sell it to a willing buyer, but of course it's by right.
Right.
And
I mean, it may go away is what the bottom line is.
right, yes, it may go away. There's a lot of interest, community interest in trying to preserve the home.
Well, maybe Chris, Daniel needs a bigger house, bigger family, bigger house. That's what I always say.
I think that price tag is it's high.
Might be a little out of my fair government salary.
I've heard it's high.
Any other suggestions by ARB members? John, I think you're talking, but
Okay, yeah, I'm on mute.
there you go.
An observation, the AIA Virginia chapter wrote a letter to Chairman Mckay concerning the One University Plaza building. It just said, it's lamenting its loss, but offering to help the county in assessing its historic buildings, and its historic modernist buildings will be included in that. So, Denise, if you're putting together a proposal, I believe I sent you and Laura a copy of that letter, and you might say that there is a volunteer group is interested that might be able to support that.
That's fantastic, John. Would you mind resending that to me?
No, not at all. Not at all.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with John in the mindset that I think if we're going to have the way we've seemed to have had success with this cost share is really shining in the area that they're interested in. And I think both the Reston survey as well as the African American survey are very salient ones. I think we can continue the banner on modernist architecture in Fairfax County, considering that presentation we saw. And they highlighted several locations in our county alone of examples that they wanted to highlight. So I think that's in my opinion, that'd be a great one to point out because we're continuing to see that happen. I'd really want to focus it so that it didn't just ignore the buildings, but looked at the landscapes of some of these, because I think that's a miss with Association Drive too, that there are that's half the idea with some of these modernist or more modern architecture is they do a lot of communication with the landscape around them. So
I think more than just landscape planting and so forth, it's really the site plan itself, the grouping of the buildings.
So I think if that could be a great category. The only other area, and I know Denise, you and I have talked about it in the past too, that I think if we were, in my opinion, it would be looking at the LGBTQ resources in the county. And I don't think there are any listed right currently in the county. That would be, but I don't know if that's an area we really want to push on since we're currently focusing on the African American one, and maybe we want to save that for next time. And I think right now, how many fires do we identify? I guess is the question. And do we stretch ourselves thin when we're, I feel for Marcel Bauer because it seems like every bit of his work is being attacked across the country. Maybe we've got two priorities right now. Adding a third one might be too much at the moment. That's my 10 cents. Any other observations? Michelle, there you are.
This is kind of a different little take on it, but earlier today I was making up a list of all the historic overlay districts in Fairfax County and their magisterial districts that they're in. And I realized that when you include the almost designated ones, the Holland Hills and others, and then the Wellington River Farm and all, Mount Vernon Magisterial District has the most of the historic overlay districts of the county. And then we have many other magisterial districts, several that have 0 historic overlay districts, and some that have 1, and just a couple that have 2. So it made me wonder if the fact that there are so few historic overlay districts in some districts, is that having a deleterious effect on the positions or opinions of the supervisors of those districts? Maybe they don't feel a need to have, you know, that I really care about historic preservation because I only have I have none, or I have one, or maybe two. But, you know, here we have Mount Vernon with Stork, and he's very pro preservation because he has the most. So this isn't helping you to give you an idea on some new topic to look at for a countywide survey, but you might want to look at topics that maybe will result in the identification of historic properties in districts that currently don't have that many identified. Because maybe we can get those supervisors to have a bigger interest in historic preservation. That's all I have to say.
That's a great observation, Michelle. And I think you would find it reflected in the inventory of historic sites as well. There are some magisterial districts that have a lot of inventory sites and some that don't.
I've got the map right over here on the other side of my wall, and I'm just reflecting up at it as we have our meetings. So it's a great reference point, but you're right. No, it's a good point, Michelle. And I think maybe that means one thing we would want to think about if we did a survey is focusing on identifying districts, obviously, or thinking about where there could be districts that could be identified. Obviously, that's something that the county then has to take up on its own to designate an HOD, and we're seeing what that takes at the Holland Hills level or the Homes Run Acre level. That's not that's going to be many long nights for Laura as she has to pick up that mantle and do that. But so I guess we've got a little time, Denise, because we have to write something up, right? Oh, and sorry, Elise, I saw your hand.
I just want to mention, to get back on the table, there's always single site historic districts. More Wellingtons for the world.
True, that is. So I guess if anyone, so we've got a few things that have been thrown out as suggestions and ideas. Like last time, we have to put a proposal together and we have to send letters of recommendation along with it. I mean, that's not a big ask to write that. I don't think the proposal is the trickier side of it, I imagine. So Denise, what I think figuring out how much time we have is critical, because I think anytime there's a chance for us to get money, we should pursue it.
So I was thinking that I would be back to you all in March with a topic and maybe a rough draft, which is why I wanted your input now. For either support, whatever support that whatever form that support takes. And I'll tell you, this is a big reach, but the other thing that I was thinking about is post World War II subdivisions, which might get to Michelle Aubrey's observation of being countywide and maybe hitting other districts, but that's what the county is built on, is post World War II subdivisions, and doing a survey of those, especially as the county continues to urbanize and densify. Go ahead.
Oh, would you see that something similar to kind of what they did in Reston, but maybe make sure it was focused at just a neighborhood-like level? Like we would do a reconnaissance level look at neighborhoods in the county and several districts in the county, and that'd be one way to hit several different types of areas. I mean,
right.
And Elise has got her hand up.
That was something that one of Penny Gross Mason District's appointees was very big on. So I know she would be really enthusiastic, and I think her district probably has a wealth of them. Growing up, living in Vienna, basically southeast Vienna, southwest Vienna, was a giant unit subdivision, and it's been pick that, and there's not much left to it, to be honest.
And John, you've got your hand up.
One of the things that you might do as a quick and dirty survey is to go to the county JS folk and ask them to identify clusters of homes built in, say, 1945 to 50, then another one 1950 to 55, and 55 to 60, and you can see where these things are. And you can pretty quickly identify, where these clusters are that at least just described. And then you just go out and drive around, look at them, and see if there's anything left. Would be, I think, relatively simple thing to do, to rely on the county GS system to give you the first cut.
That's a great idea. I used a similar system for the Reston survey when I just conducted the windshield survey to identify the sites that I wanted to include in the reconnaissance level survey.
Yeah.
All right, any more input for Denise on that topic? Otherwise, we'll look to hear from you.
Actually,
yeah, Joe.
I'm sorry, I have to raise my hand. I apologize. I don't know how to. I didn't do that. So I was going to say about this, about his different historical areas. You say World War II. What's interesting, I live in a place in Fairfax Station called English Hills. It's a private roads and everything, but this area, it's pretty interesting. To the woods, we have 5-10 acre lots, but intriguing, there's an old mill that's along an old Sandy Run, is the run that goes through our neighborhood. And there's an old mill, grist mill, that is left as a foundation in grist stones that were probably dating to the early 1800s, maybe even earlier. And you can even see in the woods, the old road beds that went there. They're a very depressed area where the wagons would go there and everything. Is there any kind of thing like that? And this is like early American stuff. Is there anything like that that is out there? I know Mount Vernon is, but is there something that the county has a list of, or some kind of document that shows these old roads that used to be here that are that have been abandoned but not built upon, and old mills and so forth? I mean, to me, that's where my passion is. That's what I bought out here. All the homes in this area have been built in the 60s and early 70s. Most of them have. They're eclectic homes and whatnot. So just throwing it out there. I didn't want to drag this conversation, but just curious. And if it makes sense to even do something like that.
Right. So you're talking about travel ways that no longer exist.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So we do have historic maps. We have those.
I gotcha. That's about the only way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, our archives, but if they are no longer existing in the landscape, it's difficult to identify them.
Okay.
But of course, I mean, I don't want to discount that. Let me think about that.
Because like from Michelle's standpoint, I know around that grist mill, I'm sure there's a lot of archaeological type things hanging around there, because it was a business transaction place. And so sorry to digress, but just thinking out loud. Thank you. Sorry.
It's a digression. I think it's it's an observation. Thank you.
Sure. Yep.
Thanks, Joe. Any other new business? Mr. Burns.
Do we know anything about a potential replacement for Mr. McReynolds?
I have not heard anything, but I can ask.
Yeah.
I'll also observe, unless any of you have heard anything, I have reached out every meeting to Ms. Knockins and have not gotten any response from her regarding her attendance at these meetings. So if any of you outside of this have contact with her, please feel free to reach out on my behalf and indicate that. But I have not gotten any response.
And I have historically reached out to her before these meetings and said, here's where the SharePoint site is. Here, you can participate, you can send in written comments. Nothing. No response.
All right. I have been, as you know, we've been documenting absences and attendances of this meeting, and we'll continue from there. I think on a positive light, obviously, since I last saw you all, as you all know, my wife and I welcomed our daughter, Livia Autumn Daniel, into the world on January 15th. Amusingly, I had actually just, I think, a short story here that I was telling Denise that on our ARB meeting, my wife was experiencing some minor contractions. And so I almost was feeling like at that point, I was going to have to tell you guys I had to leave. She decided she didn't want to be born on a Thursday and inconvenience Dad. She wanted the government administration to be able to happen. So she waited till the 15th. Very polite of her, considering her parents are civil servants. But Mom and daughter are wonderful and quite happy. I emailed you all a new updated picture of her. And so far, it sounds like everything's going well upstairs. So, but on that happy news, thank you for all the well wishes from all of you as well on that. All right. Seeing no other new signals of any new business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A motion adjourns always in order. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I don't think so. Abstentions? Oh, opposed by Mr. Plumpy.
No, I was joking. I was joking. I already said aye.
You can stay all night, Joe.
There you go.
No abstentions. The motion
Appreciate it.
carries.
No,
See you
no.
all.